"You're not welcome at the Mother's Day celebration," Vanessa said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the quiet morning air. I froze mid-step in the kitchen, my hand still holding the freshly brewed coffee, the smell of toast lingering faintly from the counter. Ryan sat across the table, avoiding my gaze, his fork idly tapping against the china plate. The dining room, bathed in the soft light of the early May sun streaming through the blinds, suddenly felt cold and expansive, the shadows of the blinds stretching across the floor like thin fingers. I set the coffee down carefully, the ceramic cup barely making a sound, and simply nodded, my lips pressed together, my mind cataloging every detail of Vanessa's expression, the slight twitch of her jaw, the tightening of her shoulders. She glanced at Ryan, seeking confirmation, a subtle nod, and he gave it, just enough to betray complicity without speaking a word. I stepped back, my eyes sweeping the room, noticing the floral centerpiece slightly askew, the delicate lace placemats still pristine, untouched. Memories flickered through my mind like a muted slideshow, the countless times I had arranged similar breakfasts, birthday surprises, holiday dinners, the careful way I'd remembered every preference and allergy, the way I had taught Ryan to set the table properly, the small gestures that made our house a home. Now, the same room seemed alien, every detail conspiring to highlight my absence from the heart of the family. I took a slow breath, the aroma of the brewing coffee grounding me, and walked toward the window. Outside, the garden was waking up, the roses Eleanor had planted 3 years ago just starting to bloom, a delicate pink against the fresh green of the spring lawn. I could hear the faint hum of traffic on the street, the distant laughter of children playing in a neighbor's yard. I let my mind wander briefly, cataloging the past week, the subtle signs I had overlooked. Vanessa's increased control over Ryan's schedule, the way she rearranged his calls and appointments without consulting me, the small changes in the family's routines that seemed insignificant at the time but now revealed a pattern of exclusion. I glanced at Ryan again. He kept his eyes lowered, fingers drumming lightly against the table. I could see the hesitation, the brief flicker of guilt, quickly masked by a forced neutrality. I walked back to the kitchen counter and leaned lightly against it, letting my arms rest, feeling the weight of the morning settle around me. I remembered preparing a special breakfast, the way I had sliced the strawberries for Ryan, placed the maple syrup in the small pitcher he liked, arranged the toast just so, all for a day that now felt orchestrated to remind me of my position in the family hierarchy. I poured myself a small cup of coffee, the liquid warm against my palms, and sipped slowly, letting the heat anchor me. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The words Vanessa had spoken had left their mark, but my silence, the controlled calm in my posture, was equally powerful. I allowed my mind to drift through every Mother's Day I had celebrated with the family, every card I had written, every small gift wrapped with care, and realized that none of those gestures guaranteed respect or gratitude. It was a stark lesson, the subtle cruelty woven into a single sentence, a command veiled as a declaration. I set the cup down again, steadying myself, and walked toward the living room, letting my eyes linger on the photos of past celebrations, smiling faces frozen in time, unaware of the tensions that had begun to unfold. The air was thick with expectation and unspoken words, the quiet punctuated by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. I sat in my favorite chair, the upholstery familiar under my fingertips, and allowed myself to consider my options, the first seeds of resolve taking root quietly, unnoticed by Vanessa or Ryan. The morning continued around me, yet I was detached, observing every motion, every glance, cataloging, planning, all while maintaining the composure of a woman who had been underestimated, a woman who understood that true power often lay in patience and silent calculation, letting them believe they had won this small battle while I began to gather my strength for the larger one yet to come. The kitchen remained quiet after I had taken my seat, the sunlight shifting slightly as clouds moved across the morning sky. Outside, the garden was alive with the soft hum of bees and the distant chirping of birds, a sharp contrast to the tension inside the house. I poured a second cup of coffee, the warmth spreading through my fingers, and sipped slowly, letting the silence settle around me like a heavy curtain. I traced my gaze over the photographs on the mantel, images of birthdays, graduations, and family vacations, all of them captured in moments of laughter and apparent harmony, yet now revealing themselves as illusions of unity. My eyes lingered on the framed picture of Ryan as a child, holding my hand tightly as he balanced on the edge of the porch, a wide grin plastered across his face. I remembered how I had held him steady, guiding him through those first tentative steps, unaware that those same hands would one day distance themselves from me under influence I had not yet fully understood. The coffee mug warmed my palms again as I leaned back, letting my gaze drift toward the window. I noticed the small details, the wind chimes swaying slightly, the hydrangeas beginning to bloom, the way the light reflected off the small puddle left by last night's rain. These minute observations, normally insignificant, now seemed charged with a strange resonance, a quiet reminder that life continues in the background while our personal dramas unfold. I could feel the pulse of the house itself, the wooden floors creaking faintly beneath my weight as I shifted in my chair, each sound echoing through the emptiness of the room. The subtle scent of vanilla from the candles I had lit yesterday lingered faintly, mingling with the aroma of coffee, creating an almost comforting familiarity that countered the unease. My mind replayed the past few weeks, the subtle changes in Ryan's behavior, the way he had hesitated before answering questions, the careful avoidance of eye contact, and the way Vanessa had orchestrated small events to test boundaries and reactions, all meticulously calculated yet barely perceptible. I recalled arranging the living room for a casual breakfast the morning of Mother's Day, selecting the blue and white china I knew Ryan preferred, setting out fresh fruit and muffins, the napkins folded neatly beside each plate. Each choice had been deliberate, meant to express care and attention, a silent communication of love. Yet, now, the deliberate act of exclusion weighed heavily on me, an invisible barrier set by someone I had once welcomed into my family with open arms. I took another sip, the liquid grounding me as I reflected on the history of the house, the way each piece of furniture carried memory, the sofa where we had gathered for story time, the dining table where we had celebrated countless milestones, and how Vanessa's presence had now subtly reshaped that space into something foreign, a theater for hierarchy and manipulation. I noticed the small shifts in the air, the way Vanessa had positioned herself, the barely perceptible glance Ryan exchanged with her, the careful spacing of chairs, all creating a tableau designed to make me feel peripheral. My fingers traced the edge of the table, feeling the smooth wood beneath my skin, a tactile anchor to reality as I planned my next move silently, letting the tension coexist with outward calm. In this quiet observation, I found clarity, the early stages of a strategy forming in my mind, each thought precise, deliberate, designed to counterbalance the manipulations around me. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating dust motes dancing lazily in the air, a slow, steady reminder that time flows inexorably, that moments pass and opportunities emerge quietly. I allowed myself a small, controlled smile, a private acknowledgement of the awareness I had gained, the understanding that patience, observation, and careful timing could wield more power than confrontation or anger, and that the house, for all its memories and its present discomforts, still held space for me to assert presence and reclaim dignity in ways unseen and undeniable. The soft light of late morning filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors as I moved slowly through the living room. I paused by the mantel, my fingers brushing against the smooth frame of a photograph showing Ryan and Vanessa at a recent holiday gathering, both smiling at the camera while I stood slightly to the side, unnoticed. The contrast between the captured joy and the reality of the morning was sharp, like a silent accusation embedded in the frozen smiles. I walked toward the dining table, noting the subtle adjustments Vanessa had made to the place settings, the slight shift of the silverware, the positioning of the napkins that seemed designed for symmetry, yet also served as a reminder of my peripheral status. The aroma of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of freshly baked muffins I had prepared hours before, now cooled and untouched. I poured a small glass of orange juice, the liquid catching the sunlight, and sipped deliberately, allowing the mundane routine to anchor my thoughts as I considered the unfolding dynamics. My gaze drifted to the kitchen window, the garden beyond alive with spring colors, the roses and tulips gently swaying in the breeze, a quiet backdrop to the undercurrents of tension inside. I remembered the previous weeks, the small incidents that had seemed insignificant at the time. Vanessa redirecting phone calls, subtle comments designed to unsettle, the rearrangement of schedules that made my presence less central, all culminating in this deliberate display of exclusion. I placed the glass down carefully and ran a hand along the edge of the table, feeling the fine grain of the wood beneath my fingers, each line a reminder of the years I had invested in creating a home where care and attention to detail had been my signature. I took a slow breath, noticing the faint reflection of sunlight on the silver handles of the cabinet, the gentle creak of the floorboards beneath my weight as I shifted position, the hum of distant traffic outside. The morning stretched on, quiet and deliberate, giving me the space to observe, to catalog every nuance, every glance between Ryan and Vanessa, the way she subtly guided his movements, the way he hesitated before responding to questions, the faint flicker of unease crossing his face. I allowed my thoughts to trace the patterns, connecting the dots between actions, timing, and intention, seeing clearly the meticulous orchestration behind every seemingly casual gesture. I walked slowly toward the window seat, settling into its familiar cushions, and let my eyes wander over the neighborhood, the distant laughter of children on the sidewalk, the low hum of a passing car, the soft rustle of leaves in the spring wind. In that quiet, I began to map a path forward, considering each possibility with careful precision, each step a measured response to the manipulations around me, understanding that patience and observation were as vital as action. The world outside continued unabated, indifferent to the subtleties of human interaction within, yet within the room, every detail spoke volumes, and I listened attentively, the beginnings of a plan forming quietly, deliberately, beneath the calm surface of my demeanor. As the morning unfolded, the soft sunlight stretched across the living room, illuminating every familiar corner and casting shadows that seemed to emphasize my solitude. I traced my fingers along the armrest of the chair I had chosen to settle into, feeling the fabric, worn smooth over years of use, grounding me in the present as my mind wandered through a tapestry of memories. Each memory was a small fragment of the life I had built, every family gathering meticulously planned, every holiday imbued with care, each birthday marked with personal touches meant to celebrate love and togetherness. I could see clearly now the subtle threads that had been woven to marginalize me, the small orchestrations Vanessa had executed, the carefully chosen words, the positioning of herself and Ryan, creating a narrative in which my presence was inconvenient, almost invisible. The aroma of the recently brewed coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of the garden flowers wafting through the open window, a delicate reminder that life and beauty persisted beyond human conflict. I let my gaze drift outside to the lawn, watching the leaves tremble in the gentle breeze, the early blooms of tulips and daffodils catching the sunlight, vibrant against the deep green of the grass, a quiet contrast to the calculated stillness inside the house. I reflected on the meals I had prepared, the careful selection of china and silverware, the hours spent folding napkins and arranging centerpieces, all gestures of thoughtfulness that had once been met with gratitude and now went unacknowledged. The ticking of the clock on the mantel marked the passage of time steadily, each second a gentle but persistent reminder that I had witnessed, absorbed, and endured far more than these recent actions suggested. I moved to the window seat, letting my hands rest lightly on the edge, feeling the cool surface beneath my palms, each detail a tactile anchor as I thought through the unfolding dynamics. The subtle tension between Ryan and Vanessa was present in every glance, every slight hesitation, every carefully controlled smile. I observed them without judgment, cataloging the movements, the interactions, the micro-expressions, understanding that patience and attentive observation would be more powerful than confrontation. I remembered past Mother's Days, past family dinners, the laughter and chatter that had filled these rooms, and how each act of care I had provided had subtly trained the family to take my presence for granted. I acknowledged the quiet sense of betrayal, not with anger but with clarity, recognizing patterns that had been invisible before, now glaringly evident in the measured behavior of both Ryan and Vanessa. Sitting there, enveloped in the quiet of the morning, I allowed the first stirrings of a plan to form, understanding that strategy and precision would outweigh emotional reaction. The room was still, every sound magnified, the soft rustle of leaves outside, the faint hum of distant traffic, the occasional bird calling from the garden, each reinforcing my awareness of the rhythm of life continuing beyond the confines of these orchestrated tensions. I felt the weight of history and the depth of my own resolve intertwine, the past shaping the clarity with which I could approach the present, the memories of care and attention forming the basis for an unwavering, deliberate presence that would not be ignored or underestimated. My thoughts circled around possibilities, quietly considering timing, observation, and the careful deployment of influence, knowing that each measured step could reassert my position in a family that had temporarily shifted its alignment. In the stillness, I found focus, and with each passing moment, the strength of intention solidified, forming a quiet but unshakable foundation for the days ahead, the familiar surroundings of my home serving as both witness and ally to the careful, patient strategy one was beginning to craft. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting warm light across the living room and catching the edges of the curtains as they swayed slightly with the breeze from the open window. I remained seated in my chair, the familiar fabric pressing gently against my back, grounding me as my mind continued to trace the subtle patterns of interaction that had unfolded earlier. Every glance, every careful placement of objects, every measured word between Ryan and Vanessa had created a landscape of intent that was now unmistakably clear. I sipped slowly from my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, and allowed my gaze to settle on the small garden visible through the window. The tulips and daffodils were in full bloom, the colors vibrant, undisturbed by the tension within the walls of the house. I reflected on the past weeks, noting the incremental steps Vanessa had taken to assert control, the way she had influenced schedules, diverted attention, and subtly undermined my presence. I recalled preparing lunches and dinners for Ryan, the small gestures that had always been unnoticed but intended to reinforce the bonds of family, and now contrasted sharply with the deliberate exclusion I had experienced this morning. The sunlight highlighted the polished surfaces of the dining table, where the careful arrangement of place settings reflected the symmetry Vanessa favored, a visual reminder of her attempt to organize not only the room but the hierarchy within it. I allowed myself to think of alternative perspectives, considering what Ryan might have perceived, the way he hesitated, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, and how these moments of hesitation hinted at a recognition of the imbalance that had been orchestrated. I moved my hand over the table, the smooth surface reassuring beneath my fingertips, and focused on the calm rhythm of my own breathing, each inhalation and exhalation reinforcing the clarity forming in my mind. Outside, a pair of sparrows flitted across the yard, their wings catching the sunlight in rapid, graceful movements, oblivious to the strategies and conflicts inside the house. I took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee, noting the lingering aroma and the warmth it provided as a quiet comfort amidst the mental calculations forming. My gaze traveled back to the photographs on the wall, images of family vacations and milestones, and I allowed myself a small, controlled smile at the recognition of my own steady presence across the years, the consistency and care that had remained constant despite shifting dynamics around me. I considered the layout of the house, the way each room could support observation, each hallway a vantage point, and began mentally outlining the subtle measures I could take to reassert my influence without confrontation, using the same patience and attentiveness that had guided me through decades of family life. The soft hum of distant traffic, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the faint aroma of flowers from the garden all combined to create a quiet backdrop, a stillness that allowed my thoughts to unfold with precision. I let the moments stretch, the minutes accumulating like small, deliberate steps toward understanding and action, each observation recorded, each detail stored. In this focused calm, I found the first traces of strategy taking shape, the recognition that careful patience and deliberate observation could be the most effective response, and that the foundation for reclaiming presence and influence was being quietly, steadily laid, ready to be enacted when the moment was right. The late afternoon light slanted through the window, warming the surfaces of the living room with a golden hue that seemed to soften the sharp edges of tension in the air. I remained seated, my posture relaxed but attentive, letting my eyes travel over the familiar space that had long been a witness to family celebrations, small arguments, and quiet reconciliations. Each piece of furniture, each photograph on the wall, held memories I had curated carefully over decades, a silent testimony to the life I had built with care and dedication. The aroma of coffee lingered faintly from the cup I had set aside earlier, mixing with the subtle fragrance of the tulips in the garden just outside the window, their petals catching the light in bright, reassuring bursts of color. I reflected on the progression of the morning, on the subtle exchanges, the unspoken messages conveyed through glances, posture, and timing. I noted how Vanessa had positioned herself, how Ryan responded to her cues, and how these carefully orchestrated interactions revealed patterns that could be anticipated and navigated. The realization was steadying, a quiet confirmation that observation and strategic patience were tools as potent as any direct confrontation. I rose slowly, walking toward the bookshelf along the far wall, my fingers tracing the spines of volumes that held years of accumulated knowledge, history, and narrative. I selected a notebook, the pages crisp and waiting, and began jotting notes in careful, deliberate handwriting, mapping out sequences, timing, and potential responses, all while keeping my voice calm and measured should anyone be present. Outside, the sun continued its descent, casting longer shadows across the lawn and illuminating the slight movement of the wind in the leaves, a reminder of continuity and the flow of time. I let my mind wander briefly to past Mother's Days, noting the pattern of preparation, anticipation, and care I had invested, contrasted against the current orchestrated exclusion that had brought clarity to subtle dynamics I had previously overlooked. I considered each interaction, each choice made by Vanessa, and the quiet hesitations in Ryan, cataloging them in my mind and in the notebook, developing a mental framework that was both precise and adaptable. I poured another small cup of coffee, the liquid warm in my hands, a grounding ritual as I reviewed my observations, noting the timing of gestures, the choice of words, the spacing in the room, and the influence of peripheral cues on the overall narrative. I allowed each thought to settle, integrating reflection with planning, understanding that control could be exercised quietly, with patience and insight rather than overt confrontation. The house felt alive in subtle ways, the faint creak of the floorboards under shifting weight, the gentle hum of distant traffic, the occasional bird call from the garden, and I absorbed these details, recognizing their value in constructing a careful, measured approach. I returned to the living room chair, placing the notebook beside me, and rested my hands lightly on the armrests, feeling the texture, the solidity, the history embedded in the material. I considered next steps, potential conversations, and timing, knowing that every move would carry weight if executed with precision. The calm afternoon stretched around me, a protective envelope for planning and reflection, and I allowed the quiet to deepen, understanding that in patience, observation, and subtlety, influence and presence could be quietly reclaimed without raising alarm or prompting resistance. The sun had begun its slow descent, filtering a warm amber glow through the sheer curtains and casting long, soft shadows across the living room floor. I remained seated, my posture calm yet attentive, observing the subtle shifts in light and the way it reflected off the polished surfaces of the furniture I had carefully chosen over the years. Each photograph on the wall seemed to whisper stories of past celebrations, holidays, and birthdays, now juxtaposed with the silent tension of the present moment. The faint scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the aroma of garden flowers drifting in from the open window, carrying a sense of continuity beyond the immediate conflicts. I allowed my eyes to wander over the room, noting the precise arrangement of chairs and tableware, the small adjustments Vanessa had made, seemingly innocuous, yet each contributing to an orchestrated narrative. Ryan sat quietly, occasionally shifting in his chair, his movements subtle but telling, betraying an awareness of the imbalance in the room and the careful measures I was taking to understand it. I reflected on the patterns that had emerged over the past days. The careful timing of interactions, the choice of words, the micro-expressions, the glances shared and withheld, and cataloged them meticulously in my mind. Each observation a piece of a larger framework I was building. Outside, the garden was vibrant with spring colors, the tulips and daffodils nodding gently in the breeze, a quiet counterpoint to the orchestrated subtleties within the house. I traced my fingers along the arm of the chair, feeling the familiar textures grounding me, as my mind considered possible approaches, weighing each with measured attention. The gentle hum of distant traffic, the faint chirping of birds, and the soft rustle of leaves combined to create a stillness that encouraged reflection and focus, a contrast to the quiet, calculated tension of the interior. I sipped coffee slowly, allowing the warmth to settle and the rhythm of the day to provide clarity, reinforcing the patience and deliberate attention that were essential to my approach. I considered the memories of past Mother's Days, family dinners, and shared milestones, reflecting on the consistency of care and presence I had contributed, and the way those contributions had subtly gone unrecognized in recent interactions. I observed the interplay of energy between Ryan and Vanessa, noting the delicate balance of influence, hesitation, and awareness, and recognized the opportunities for subtle assertion of presence without overt confrontation. My gaze returned to the photographs on the wall, tracing faces frozen in time, each image a reminder of what had been nurtured and the foundation of respect and care I had built over decades. I allowed each thought to solidify into a coherent strategy, considering timing, observation, and measured action, understanding that the restoration of presence and influence could be accomplished quietly, methodically, and with subtlety. The room remained still, the light deepening, shadows stretching, and I settled back slightly, feeling the culmination of focus, patience, and clarity converge, creating a sense of calm readiness, a deliberate anticipation of the next steps in the quietly unfolding course of events. The evening light softened the edges of the living room, casting a warm, amber hue over the familiar furniture and photographs that lined the walls. I remained in my chair, the cushions familiar beneath me, and let my eyes travel slowly over the space, noting the details of the room I had arranged and curated over decades. The aroma of the coffee I had prepared hours earlier lingered faintly, mingling with the faint floral scent drifting from the open window where the garden basked in the last rays of the day. Each sound, from the subtle creak of the floorboards beneath a passing breeze to the distant hum of traffic outside, seemed heightened in the quiet of the house, a backdrop to the carefully measured observations I maintained. I reflected on the interactions of the morning, the subtle dynamics between Ryan and Vanessa, their gestures, glances, and small inflections that revealed intentions and power shifts I had cataloged. The memories of past holidays, birthdays, and quiet family moments came to mind, reminding me of the foundation of care and consistency I had established over the years, a contrast to the present orchestration that had sought to marginalize me. I traced my fingers along the armrest of the chair, the texture grounding me as my thoughts moved through strategies and reflections, noting how patience and quiet observation had revealed opportunities for subtle assertion of presence without confrontation. Outside, the garden was bathed in golden light, the tulips, daffodils, and early roses catching the sun, their colors vibrant, almost defiant in their persistence, a quiet parallel to the clarity forming within me. I considered each minor detail of Vanessa's behavior, the placement of chairs, the pacing of conversations, the timing of interactions, all contributing to an understanding of the orchestration around me, and I allowed these observations to settle into a coherent awareness. I lifted my cup of coffee and sipped slowly, appreciating the warmth as it traveled through me, centering my focus and reinforcing the patience that had guided my approach. The photographs on the wall reflected the soft light, each face frozen in moments of joy and celebration, now juxtaposed with the deliberate manipulation I had witnessed, highlighting the contrast between the past and present. I allowed the quiet to deepen, listening to the gentle sounds of the house, noting the way the air shifted, the way light played across surfaces, all reinforcing the awareness and control I had cultivated. I let my mind map the possibilities, each scenario considered carefully, the subtleties of timing, word choice, and observation forming a delicate but precise strategy. Sitting there, I felt the gradual consolidation of focus, patience, and insight, the calm before action, a steady confidence emerging from reflection and understanding. The room seemed to breathe with me, every detail both familiar and informative, and I recognized the power inherent in quiet attentiveness, the ability to reclaim presence and influence without overt assertion, relying instead on perception, timing, and the unspoken authority that comes from experience and careful consideration. In that stillness, I understood the potential of the next steps, the way measured observation could guide precise, deliberate action, and how the accumulation of small insights and careful attention could shift the balance subtly yet decisively within the household. The evening deepened, the last traces of sunlight fading and giving way to a gentle twilight that filtered through the curtains in muted streaks of color. I remained in my chair, the familiar contours supporting me as my mind traced the narrative of the day, noting the subtleties of behavior, posture, and expression that had unfolded around me. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the mantel clock and the distant sounds of neighbors returning from their evening routines, the normalcy outside contrasting sharply with the orchestrated tension within the house. I reflected on the small gestures I had observed, the precise timing of glances, the pauses in conversation, and the micro-expressions that spoke volumes about intentions and perceptions. I traced my gaze over the family photographs on the wall, each frozen moment a testament to years of care, celebration, and presence, now juxtaposed with the current undercurrents of exclusion and manipulation. The aroma of the coffee I had prepared earlier lingered faintly, providing a subtle comfort, grounding me as I considered the strategy that had begun to take shape over the course of the day. I allowed my thoughts to flow freely, reviewing the careful attention I had given to detail in the household, the preparation of meals, the arrangement of flowers, and the small but deliberate acts of thoughtfulness that had previously gone unnoticed or unacknowledged. Outside, the garden was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the tulips and daffodils bowing gently in the evening breeze, and the distant hum of traffic created a quiet rhythm that contrasted with the heightened awareness I maintained within the room. I took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee, allowing the warmth to settle and sharpen my focus, noting each subtle movement and interaction, the way Ryan shifted in his chair, the brief glances exchanged with Vanessa, the careful cadence of words and gestures. I considered the implications of each observation, the small openings for subtle assertion of presence, and the ways in which patience, timing, and calm attention could influence outcomes without overt confrontation. The room felt alive with the residue of the day's events, each object, each photograph, each carefully placed chair contributing to the silent dialogue of power, attention, and acknowledgement. I allowed a small, private smile to touch my lips, the first outward acknowledgement of the clarity and confidence that had been steadily building within me, an awareness that the quiet control I exercised was as potent as any overt statement. I revisited the mental map of interactions, noting potential adjustments, timing, and sequences, reinforcing the deliberate approach that would guide the days to come. The light outside faded further, the shadows stretching long and soft across the floor, and I felt the weight of accumulated awareness, observation, and preparation coalesce into a steady, deliberate readiness. In that quiet, I understood fully that influence, presence, and respect could be reclaimed through careful attention and patience, each measured observation and deliberate reflection contributing to a foundation of calm authority, a subtle but unassailable force that had been quietly growing since the morning, and one that would shape the unfolding dynamics in ways neither Ryan nor Vanessa could anticipate or ignore.